Back in the late 1930s, the Great Depression was in full swing, and it was certainly taking its toll on everybody. So how did they manage to survive? Here are 50 dinners that saw Americans through the dark days of the Great Depression.
Beautiful and delicious stuffed bell peppers. They make a beautiful and delicious dinner.
1. Chef John's stuffed peppers. Stuffed peppers and tomatoes are the close twins of potatoes when it comes to comfort food. They're almost like a Swiss Army knife, astonishingly versatile. And they became the star of the show for this next Great Depression-era staple, Chef John's stuffed peppers. It all started when farmers would sell unripe peppers out of necessity so their produce wouldn't waste. Families who were going through tough times were always only too ready to snap them up. Now, in typical American fashion, faced with a new variety of ingredients, the peppers were stuffed with meat. To make it, start by cooking the rice, bringing it to a boil with water, then lowering the heat to simmer until tender for about 25 minutes. Once it is done, set it aside. To make the sauce, cook some onion in olive oil over medium heat for about 5 minutes, setting half of it aside in a large bowl. To the skillet with the remaining onion, add in marinara sauce, beef broth, balsamic vinegar, and a pinch of red pepper flakes, cooking it for a minute before pouring it into a baking dish. For the filling, mix ground beef, Italian sausage, diced tomatoes, parsley, garlic, seasonings, and cayenne in the bowl with onions. Then stir in the cooked rice and some Parmigiano Reggiano. Then stuff this mixture into green bell pepper halves. Then place the stuffed peppers over the sauce in the baking dish, sprinkle them with more Parmigiano Reggiano, and cover the dish with foil. After baking for 45 minutes, remove the foil and bake for another 20 minutes until the peppers are tender, the meat is cooked through, and the cheese is golden. The result of this was a top-notch dish that you could make from leftovers and kept incredibly well, much like our next dish.
Tomato soup in a cake? Yes. What makes it so good? And guess what? It's a can of tomato soup.
2 tomato cakes? Now, if there's anything about the Great Depression, it's how much it tested people's creativity. And for this next dish, tomato cakes, every single ingredient had to count. Tomatoes in a cake might sound crazy to you now, but for people in the 1930s, it was all they had. Think about it. At the time, stuff like eggs, milk, and butter were just out of many people's budget, and canned tomato soup was the only other alternative if you needed to bake a cake. But it wasn't just affordable. Tomato soup was a pretty versatile option too. You could sweeten it with sugar or spice things up with cinnamon and nutmeg. The cakes quickly became popular for their peculiar flavor. I mean, what could be better than a cake with an acidic, tangy taste balanced out by the sweetness of sugar? Of course, the cakes could be topped off with a cream sauce after they'd cooled from the oven. The cakes were so good that nobody would even bother to ask about what the main ingredients were. Everyone just wanted to savor the amazing flavors. And it's just the same case today whenever this cake is baked. Some people even decide to puree fresh tomatoes instead of just tomato soup. A certainly healthier option, but the taste and economic value is just as good as it was back then. Talking about economic value, our next dinner provided that and more.
Simple and easy breakfast recipe that I've come to enjoy. It simply involves some eggs, ham, and a few toppings.
3 ham cups and eggs. Coming in at number 1 is one of the wonderful inventions of the Great Depression. We're talking about ham cups and eggs, a dish you could whip up in less than 30 minutes with just a couple of eggs, ham, and mashed potatoes. Anything you had worked for this dish. Leftover mashed potatoes, ham, leftover chives or shredded cheese, unfinished hollandaise sauce, everything was welcome in this budget-conscious dish. All you had to do was preheat your oven and ready a large enough casserole dish. Then, spread a layer of mashed potatoes about an inch thick across the bottom of your dish and press slices of ham into them to form cute little cup shapes. Next, you'd crack an egg into each ham cup, dot the potatoes with butter, and sprinkle some parsley on top. After baking for almost an hour, just until the eggs set, you'd scoop out the ham cups with their mashed potato base, plate them, and top everything off with a drizzle of hollandaise sauce. Ham cups and eggs was a simple and practical delight, much like our next dish. 4 spaghetti sauce with cauliflower. Enter a spaghetti sauce with cauliflower, another veggie-based dish that was popular during the 1930s. For many people, especially struggling Italian immigrant families, meat was too expensive a source of protein for them to eat, so they switched over to using readily available vegetables like cauliflowers in their sauces. The result was an amazing sauce that topped well over any pasta you could possibly think of, and it wasn't just about stretching meals or the taste. Cauliflowers are bursting with vitamins and fiber, so this meal was nutritious. It's pretty easy to make, too. Just heat olive oil over medium heat in a saucepan, and in it cook garlic, onions, and of course, your cauliflower. You want to stir it occasionally until your cauliflower starts having a tender brown color. That should take around 30 minutes. Now pour in your spices: basil, black pepper, and crushed tomatoes. Let it all simmer until your sauce thickens and you're sure the flavors have all blended together. This should take another half hour. So, yeah, a full hour. But after that, you can pour this sauce over just about pasta and be sure to expect tasting heaven. On to our next dish.
A very simple dish from the time of the Great Depression. It's called Hoover stew.
5 Hoover stew. This next dish was another Depression-era special that reflected the people's resilience during those difficult days of President Hoover's administration. Enter Hoover stew, a literal lifeline for families who were struggling to make ends meet in the 1930s. This dish allowed people use whatever ingredients they had on hand to create a sumptuous filling meal. Pantry staples like onions, potatoes, and canned vegetables, anything was welcome. The perfect thing about this dish is it could be made in large batches to feed many families. To make it, start by boiling some pasta, allowing it to absorb some of the stew's liquid later without becoming mushy. In a large pot, drain the pasta and combine it with canned tomatoes, drained corn, beans, and sliced hot dogs. Bring everything to a boil, then reduce the heat and let it simmer for close to 20 minutes. Serve the hearty stew hot, perhaps with a slice of bread or some dandelion greens for a proper Depression-era touch. Our next dish, much like Hoover stew, was the perfect dish to get by on in those hard times.
I would guess like you use applesauce or something, like some kind of a different apple would be my guess. Hold on, let me...
6 mock apple pie. This next dish was one of those mellas that reflected the ingenuity and inventive spirit of people in the 1930s. Everything was so expensive, even apples. But did that stop people from living their lives? You bet it didn't. Since it was practically impossible to make apple pie with regular apples, Americans stumbled on a new invention: mock apple pie. The idea was simple: swap out scarce, overpriced apples for cheaper Ritz crackers, and you'd have a faux dish that was as tasty as the original. Actually, the history of this dish goes way back to the 1800s, when families would replace apples with stale bread or soda crackers. But as the 1930s approached, and things became tighter for families, mock apple pie moved from something had once in a while to a staple. It became so popular that Nabisco in 1935, after selling 5 billion out of those Ritz crackers, printed a mock apple pie recipe on their cracker boxes. The idea behind this dish is pretty simple. Just follow the same procedure as you would for a real apple pie. But when it's time to make the crust, use crumbled crackers to mimic the flavor of regular apples. It'll smell like apple pie, taste like it even, maybe even a bit better.
Today, it is an amazing bread pudding with bread pudding sauce with just a touch of brandy in there.
7 bread pudding. Now, we've always had bread pudding right from 11th century English cooks who had the bright idea of reusing stale bread so it wouldn't get spoiled. Their idea later became known as poor man's pudding. But it was actually during the 1930s that it experienced a resurgence on struggling Americans' plates. Since then, it's never really left the conversation. I mean, contrary to the popular perception about poor people's food, bread pudding tastes good and is appreciated by even the pickiest of eaters. The beautiful thing about it, aside the full hour of baking it takes, this dish is pretty easy to make. Try it out. All you need are some cubes of bread and some extras for additional flavor. Here's how. Preheat your oven and grease a baking dish. Next, get a bowl and whisk milk, sugar, melted butter, eggs, brown sugar, and cinnamon together. Now, gently stir in your breadcrumbs with some raisins. Bake this in your oven for about an hour. Now, you'd want to serve this dish with a fitting vanilla sauce. So whisk milk, brown sugar, butter, eggs, flour, cinnamon, and some salt in a saucepan, and cook over medium heat for about 10 or 12 minutes until it's thickened. Now stir in your vanilla extract and your sauce is ready. You could pour it over your pudding or just serve it on the side. On to our next bread-based dish.
It's oat bread. It has ingredients you already have in your supply, so you can make this delicious bread anytime you want.
8 oatmeal bread. The Great Depression was all about pinching every single dollar. Families could only save by being absolutely frugal, so one popular practice was buying ingredients in bulk, then using them for various meals. One good example was oatmeal. Families would prepare large batches of oatmeal and then use it as a base for a variety of meals, the most popular of which was oatmeal bread. Making it is pretty easy. First, you start by mixing oats and oil into a large bowl, then add some boiling water and stir well. Let it cool. While you're waiting, pour yeast, lukewarm water, and some sugar into another bowl. When your oat mixture cools, gradually add the yeast, then some dry milk and flour until a dough forms, and leave them in a warm place until they've doubled in size. Then shape them into loaves and bake until they're golden brown. From this bread-based dish, let's talk about some pie in the next.
It sort of tastes like lemon, but the nutmeg actually makes it taste more like apple pie without the apples.
9-water pie. During the Great Depression, some meals were just impossible for families to have. Eggs, fancy desserts, they were all shelved. Things were just too hard, and people had to create newer, cheaper meals with the little they had. Out of these difficult times came our next dish, water pie. The idea was to start with an unbaked up pie crust and then fill it with water. You'd then sprinkle a mixture of flour and sugar over your pie shell for a custardy consistency, then drizzle some vanilla on it and add pats of butter on top before baking to a golden brown. Of course, when it came out of the oven, it would look like a soggy, watery mess, but moms back then always knew what to do. They'd just leave the pie to sit for several hours before bringing it out to cut into smaller pieces. It had a special creamy, buttery taste, very similar to custard pies or vanilla cookies. So, in between every heavenly bite, kids could barely even tell that things were difficult for mom and dad. And it didn't just come and go like some of the other meals on our list today. In recent times, this dish has seen a huge comeback, especially from TikTok cooks who sometimes replace the water with Sprite. Next up, we'll be looking at a Depression-era classic.
I'm told that it's famous among the troops. They serve this a lot. Give this dish a try. It is so good.
10 chipped beef on toast. Chipped beef on toast was another Depression-era staple that people just could not do without during that period. While it's usually more associated with American soldiers who even nicknamed it SOS or same old stuff, during the wars, families ate it too. It was also known as creamed chipped beef and was one of those thin meals that could just magically stretch itself out to feed many different people. The reason it was so popular was because of the chipped beef, really. You see, chipped beef is basically just salted, dried beef that's been cut into thin pieces. That means it has a very long shelf life. Plus, it was relatively cheap, so you could bet it was a hit among struggling families. All they had to do was serve this chipped beef into a creamy sauce on a toast, and dinner was served. It was cheap, it was filling, and what else? It was easy to prepare. I mean, who wouldn't be comfortable with a meal that just required dried beef, flour, butter, and milk? Much like chipped beef on toast, our next treat was an acquired taste. 11 lard sandwiches. Some of you might not like this next dish at all, but during the Great Depression, when everything was rationed down to food ingredients, lard sandwiches were a staple in many homes. Yep, you heard right. A sandwich made of pig's lard was one of the more popular dishes of the time. You see, pig's meat during this period was a more affordable alternative to other fresh, more expensive options of the time. And even as affordable as it was, it still cost a pretty penny for some, so every part of it had to be put to good use. The main idea was basically to spread bread with lard. Sounds nasty? Well, definitely not as nasty as having to fight 30+ other people at the dumpster for food scraps. Sometimes the lard was seasoned with salt and pepper, or any other spices that were available. Might sound crazy by modern stomachs, but trust me, the hungry stomachs certainly weren't complaining back then. Sometimes, to make it go down easier, the bread was held to toast lightly over a fire. But trust me, it wasn't half as bad as it sounds. Next up, we'll be looking at another hearty Depression-era dish. 12-rag soup. This next dish was the ultimate make-do dish. Made with whatever scrap ingredients homemakers could lay their hands on, rag soup was one frugal recipe that helped people coast through trying times. Leftover bits of meat, vegetables, and broth would be thrown into the pot to make this heartwarming broth. And that's why they called it rag soup. Scraps and remnants were the star of this soup's show. This dish took the idea of making do with you head quite seriously. Of course, the main idea was the leftovers, but the ingredients varied from house to house. In some families, leftover cuts of chicken or pork were combined with carrots, potatoes, and any other greens. In other homes, grains like rice, barley, pasta, or even leftover bread even found their way into the broth, which was usually just made out of leftover bones or vegetables for flavor. This dish was really a potpourri of leftovers, much like this next one.
This potato soup is everything I'm wanting right now. It's warm and cozy, budget-friendly, family-friendly, and downright delicious.
13 potato soup. For some reason, potatoes have always been easily accessible. Not even the craziness of the Great Depression could take them out of the people's reach. No wonder why they were the star of this next hearty dish, potato soup. The potatoes, usually russet or Yukon Gold, gave this comforting dish a mild, earthy flavor. Then, of course, there were onions in the broth, some milk or cream, pepper, and finally butter. If you'd like to make your own potato soup, it's fairly easy actually. Just get mashed potatoes and onions in water, but don't drain. Next, stir in your milk and butter. You could also add in some butter before seasoning with salt and pepper. Make sure you serve it hot with the toppings like bacon bits, shredded cheese, or just some fresh herbs. If you're looking for some hearty carbs, our next dish would be perfect: 14 cornbread and milk. Now, this next dish wasn't such a staple because, let's face it, cornbread hardly ever has leftovers. But in some cases, families had to make sure they left some of the bread for later. The only question was how to use those leftovers. Out of this confusion came cornbread in milk. It was a fun way to use leftover cornbread by crumbling the bread into a tall glass and then topping it with creamy milk. Now, cornbread was a staple on its own in Southern cooking, especially because of how much cheaper cornmeal was than actual flour. But when you paired it with milk, my goodness, was it a hit? In fact, you could call it one of the finer foods of the Depression period, and yet it cost little to nothing. Just broken cornbread and milk, and you were good to go. 15 turnip carrot hash. Turnip carrot hash is a dish that exemplifies the resourcefulness of families during the Great Depression, utilizing inexpensive and readily available ingredients to create a filling meal. Listen, no matter how bad you think it was during the Depression, some Americans had it worse. For some people, vegetables as cheap as potatoes were completely out of the question, so they had to find cheaper alternatives, and their answer came with turnip carrot hash. In many homes, these vegetables, turnips and carrots, grew in the backyard, so you wouldn't even have to go out to the store to spend extra money to get them. Since they were so readily available, they became a popular option for meals, especially hash. It might sound like a weird menu option for many modern people, but if you'd like to have a feel of what America was like after that terrible stock market crash, make this hash today. It's pretty simple. Just heat oil or butter in a skillet over medium heat. You should have some onions around, dice and saute them. If you don't have any around, that's fine too. Just go on to the next step, which is dicing your turnips and carrots into the skillet. Now, season with salt and pepper and let everything cook for about 15 to 20 minutes. Take off the lid and let it cook for a few more moments so any excess moisture has all the time in the world to escape, leaving you with that slight crispiness that Depression-era Americans loved. Our next dish was another Depression-era classic.
This is one of the most satisfying, simply perfect meals that you will ever find in any culture.
16 Dandelion salad. The Great Depression was a really crazy period, and it brought along some really crazy meals, like this next one, dandelion salads. This dish turned something that was otherwise looked upon as a weed into something fit for dinners on the longest nights. They were in everybody's backyard, packed with vitamins and minerals, and one day, people just decided that they'd use them as food. In some families, this dish was used as a side dish, but in other settings where things were really tough, dandelion salad was the main meal. For some people, this brings back not-so-fun memories. But if you'd like to have a quick taste of what life was like during the Great Depression, here's a quick how-to. It's really easy. You could get the dandelion leaves from your backyard, or just buy some at the local store. Just make sure they're thoroughly washed, though. Then get a small bowl and shake together oil, vinegar, mustard, salt, and pepper for your dressing. Toss your dandelions into a bowl with the dressing until it coats it well. Then grate some Parmesan cheese on top. Like we said earlier, this could work well as a side dish or a meal on its own.
Let me share one of my all-time favorite snacks, peanut butter and pickle sandwich.
17 peanut butter and pickle sandwich. Peanut butter and pickle sandwiches, otherwise known as PB and P sandwiches, are definitely up there when it comes to Depression-era meals. Even today, they're still popular among women during their pregnancy cravings. But in the old days, they were more than just a flippant longing. Then peanut butter was a staple because of how much value you'd be getting for your money with it. It had lots of calories and was really cheap. So many people incorporated it into their diets, especially sandwiches. It was kind of the same story for pickles. They were cheap and hardly ever scarce. So even though they might seem like an odd pairing in a sandwich, people chose not to mind. It was easy. Just get slices of bread, which could be white or whole wheat, and then fill them with your peanut butter and pickles. A really quick option for nights after a very long day, or just in the box for the kids' lunch snack. Our next Depression-era dish was the height of creativity.
So today I'm going to show you how to make cornbread fritters.
18 fried cornbread. Feels like Depression-era Americans just couldn't run out of creative ways to use cornbread. And honestly, you can't blame them. Whenever people had run out of ingredients and ideas, cornmeal was the next safe haven to run to. Enter fried cornbread, also known as cornmeal fritters, cornmeal cakes, or even hoe cakes. They were a fun, inventive way for people to make use of their cornmeal without making things feel repetitive around the dinner table. The idea was simple. Mix cornmeal with water, some salt, and some butter. In the unusual situation where you had them, then fry and serve. For families who were a little better off, milk could be used in place of water. But most times, this dish was just served in its barest form. But of course, that wasn't all. These fried beauties could be served with a variety of cheap soups or some really soft beans. If you were looking for another versatile classic, you probably should take a look at this next dish.
Today, we're going to be making cornmeal mush.
19 cornmeal mush. Some meals just feel like love, easy and comforting, like this next one, cornmeal mush. In the dark, difficult times of the Great Depression, this dish was like a warm, big hug, quick, but filling your insides with goodness. Many other comfort meals of the period were made with very few ingredients, but this next one was quite special. You just needed two things, cornmeal and water. Talk about managing things. This dish was pretty versatile, too. Once it was brought off the fire, you had the option of either serving it hot in the form of a porridge or letting it cool before slicing it and frying for dinner. And it didn't Java to just be served bland like that. You could add in extra toppings like sugar, syrup, or milk to make things more exciting. You just had to be careful to stir in the cornmeal into the boiling water very carefully to avoid bumps.
I am making a fried bologna sandwich today. I love a good fried bologna.
20 fried bologna. Now, just because the times were difficult didn't mean people completely phased out meats from their diets. That would have just been plain impossible and unnecessary. So what did they do? They found cheaper meats, one of which was the bologna, a low-budget version of Italian mortadella. Being that it was an already processed meat, cheap, and could be stored for long periods, it fit into their needs just perfectly. In the absence of meats like pork, chicken, and steak, bologna was a literal lifesaver. The only other issue was how to make it into a warm dish, and the answer soon came, in the form of fried bologna. The idea behind it was pretty straightforward. You'd slice the bologna into thick pieces, then fry it until golden brown and really crispy and juicy inside. The result was a flavorful dish tea hat nobody could say no to, even as basic as it might have sounded. It could go as a side, or even a main dish on those darker nights. And of course, there was the innovative option of eating it as a sandwich. Just add a slice of fresh tomatoes and some other toppings, and you were good to go. Our next dish might have been a little unusual, but it made up for that with its great taste.
Today I'm going to be recreating one of my favorite dishes from Worth It, vinegar pie.
21 vinegar pie. This dish was one of the most popular Southern desserts in the 19th and the early 20th centuries, and during the Great Depression, this is a homemade pie. Made with staple ingredients, usually eggs, butter, flour, and sugar, though often even eggs and butter were omitted in lean times. Made with a small amount of vinegar sweetened with a lot of sugar, it was a very simple type of pie and inexpensive to make, at times when fresh lemons were a luxury. The recipe for this dish is pretty easy to make. It requires 7 ingredients and only 2 steps. Combine half a cup of melted cooled butter, 1½ cup sugar, 2 tablespoons self-rising flour, 2 tablespoons apple cider vinegar, 1 tablespoon vanilla, and 3 eggs in a large bowl or blender. Mix well. Pour the filling into a 9-inch unbaked pie shell. Bake the dish in an oven for 45 minutes until the filling is golden brown, but the center is still slightly jiggly. Let it cool completely before digging in. If all you wanted was some meaty variety though, let's take a look at this next dish.
We will be making meat and potato patty.
22 meat and potato patties. The next dish on our dish was really popular during World War II. When meat was rationed and had to be purchased with tokens, this recipe went a long way in feeding a family. The ingredient needed for this meal are lean ground beef, finely shredded potatoes, finely chopped onion, chopped green pepper, large eggs, a pinch of salt, a dash of canola oil, tomato juice, a bit of all-purpose flour, and some water. To make the dish, combine the first 6 ingredients and shape it into patties. In a large skillet, heat oil over medium-high heat and brown the patties on both sides. Then add tomato juice to the mix and let it simmer for about 25 minutes. After that's done, remove the patties and set them aside. Then whisk some flour into water and gradually add it into your skillet. Continue to cook it on medium-low till the mixture thickens. When that's done, serve it over your patties and dig right into it. 23 prune pudding. The next dish on our list is The prune pudding. It was very famous during the Great Depression era because prunes were cheap, available, and easily preserved. Prunes are loaded with fiber and good for your digestion, and easily preserved. Prunes are loaded with fiber and good for your digestion. Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady at the time, is credited with creating the most well-known version of prune pudding. She showed support for struggling Americans by serving prune pudding to visiting dignitaries at the White House. The White House did not provide the most upscale presidential cuisine during the Roosevelt's administration, but Eleanor herself, with the help of dietitians, created certain recipes with varying degrees of success. The ingredients needed for this dish are pitted prunes, sugar, powdered cinnamon, cinnamon stick, and a little bit of cornstarch. To make this dish, place some prunes in a saucepan, then pour in 2 cups of hot water and let it stand for 1 hour. Transfer the saucepan to the stove and bring the prunes to a boil. Reduce the heat to low and simmer, covered for 5 to 10 minutes until soft. Drain the prunes, reserving the liquid, and roughly chop. Add more hot water to the reserved prune water. Place the prunes and prune water back in the saucepan and add the sugar, powdered cinnamon, and cinnamon stick. Stir to combine and bring to a boil, then reduce heat to low and simmer for 10 minutes. Meanwhile, make a slurry by mixing the cornstarch and 2 tablespoons of cold water. Add the slurry to the prune mixture and cook over low heat for 5 minutes, stirring constantly to thicken the mixture. Remove the cinnamon stick and ladle the pudding into ramekins. Let cool, then chill in the refrigerator. Make sure to serve it cold. Next up, we'll be talking about a beefy dish that was hard to not love. 24 corned beef luncheon salad. Next on our list is the corned beef salad. Gelatin, one of the main ingredients in this dish, was a staple ingredient and was a lifesaver during the Great Depression. It was inexpensive, a decent source of protein by the day's standards, and able to be mixed with just about anything. The recipe of this dish calls for the use of 1 small package of lemon jello, 1 can of beef bouillon, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, 1 can of chopped corned beef, 3 diced hard-boiled eggs, 2 tablespoons of green onion, 1 diced celery, grated onion, and Miracle Whip. You start by dissolving the jello in the beef bouillon, add the lemon juice, let it cool, then add the rest of the ingredients and chill. Our next dish was an invention in a class of its own, 25 Mil-Corno. This next dish was developed by a research team led by Flora Rose in the early 1930s. Nutritious and also inexpensive, initially the cereal was sold exclusively to the Federal Emergency Relief Administration for distribution to Americans impoverished by the Depression. Home economists claimed that by substituting Mil-Corno for flour and cornmeal, a family of 5 could eat on less than $5 a week. To make Mil-Corno, you can combine 1 cup of cornmeal with half a cup of dry milk and half a teaspoon of salt. To cook Mil-Corno, mix the dry ingredients with 3 cups of water and it's ready to eat. Our next dish wasn't quite as simple though.
How to make a delicious ham and bean soup a favorite.
26 ham and bean soup. Another meal that was common during the Great Depression was the ham and bean soup because it was easy and used inexpensive ingredients to create a nourishing meal. To make this hearty meal, you need 1 package of dried navy beans, carrots, onions, celery, and any other vegetable of choice. Cooked a cubed ham, mashed potatoes, chicken broth, 2 bay leaves, a dash of powdered cloves, and salt and pepper for seasoning. Start by picking over the beans looking for stones. Bring a pot of water to a boil and dump in the beans. Cover and turn off heat. Soak overnight. Trim and slice vegetables. Place 1/3 of the mixture in a blender. Blend until smooth. Drain the beans. Add the blended mixture, the remaining ingredients, and chicken broth until desired consistency. Season with salt and pepper. Slowly simmer until beans are tender. The longer they cook, the better. Serve with golden wedges of cornbread, butter, and jam or apple butter. Next up, we'll be looking at a sweeter treat.
Today we're making Wacky cake. There aren't any eggs or butter in the recipe.
27 Wacky cake. Coming up next on our list is a moist chocolate dessert made without any milk, egg, or butter. It originated during the Great Depression era as a way for families to make a sweet treat. When ingredients like eggs, milk, and butter were scarce or expensive, it was originally called war cake. To make this delicious treat, you need flour, 1 cup sugar, tablespoons of cocoa, baking soda, salt, a few tablespoons of vegetable oil, vinegar, vanilla, and room temperature water. Mix the dry ingredients together in a separate bowl, then mix the wet ingredients in another bowl. Before combining the wet mixture into the dry mixture slowly, mix them until smooth and then bake in the oven at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. Let's look at another cake for our next dish.
The chocolate mayonnaise cake is one of my favorites out of this time.
28 mayonnaise cake. The next dish on our list originated during the Great Depression and was also frequently baked during the rationing of World War II, a time when a large number of food and supplies were in short supply. During World War II, ration books were issued to buy the most basic of staples, including coffee, eggs, sugar, and cooking oil. Mayonnaise became a creative substitute for cooking oils and shortening when they were in short supply. For this cake, you want real mayonnaise, not the salad dressing version. The ingredients needed for this moist dessert are 1½ cups hot dark roast coffee, 1 cup unsweetened cocoa powder, 3 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking soda, ½ a teaspoon of baking powder, ½ a teaspoon of kosher salt, 2½ cups of sugar, 4 extra large eggs, 1 cup of mayonnaise, and 1½ teaspoons of pure vanilla extract. To make the cake, add the cocoa powder to the hot coffee, stirring to dissolve the cocoa powder. In a large mixing bowl, whisk together the flour, baking soda, baking powder, and kosher salt. Toss the sugar and the eggs into a separate large mixing bowl and beat on medium-low speed until the mixture is light in color and fluffy, about 3 to 4 minutes. Add the mayonnaise along with the vanilla extract and blend in on low speed. Stir in about 2/3 of a cup of the flour mixture at a time, alternating with the coffee and cocoa. Mix each addition on low speed just until blended into the batter, beginning and ending with the flour. Scrape down the sides and bottom of the bowl occasionally to make certain the batter is well mixed. Pour the batter into the prepared cake pans, dividing evenly between the 3. Bake in a 350-degree oven for about 20 to 25 minutes or until the cakes are done by sticking it with a toothpick in the center. Check the cakes after about 20 minutes. Our next Depression era was a bit more basic though. 29 peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich. During the Great Depression, peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwiches were a cheap, calorie-dense, and filling way for Americans to get protein and fat. The sandwich was a staple in many households and was once as popular as peanut butter and jelly in the South. You'll need 1 tablespoon of mayonnaise, 1 tablespoon creamy peanut butter, and 2 slices of white bread to make this sandwich. Spread a layer of mayonnaise on 1 slice of bread and peanut butter on the other. Press the sandwich together to serve. Our next dish was just as simple, albeit a bit meatier.
In today's video, I'm going to share with you how to cook chicken livers in a way that makes them taste delicious.
30 chicken liver with onions. Chicken livers and onions became a popular dish during the Great Depression and World War II because of its affordability and nutritional value. To make this hearty meal, you'll need 1 pound of chicken livers, rinsed and patted dry, olive oil, 2 medium yellow onions, peeled and thinly sliced, 1 tablespoon of kosher salt, 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper, quality balsamic vinegar, and flaky sea salt. Rinse and drain the chicken livers. Thoroughly pat dry with paper towels and set aside. Add enough oil to cover the bottom of a large skillet, preferably cast iron, set over medium-high heat. Heat the oil until shimmering. Add the onions and cook, stirring until the onions start to change color. Season onions with a little salt. Decrease the heat to a low temperature and cook, stirring from time to time until onions are caramelized. This can take anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. Transfer onions to a plate and set aside. Add more oil to the skillet and return to medium-high heat. While the oil warms, combine flour, 1 tablespoon of salt, and pepper in a bowl. One by one, dip chicken livers into the flour mix and shake off excess. Place the livers in the skillet. The oil should sizzle, but not too much. Sear the livers until well browned on all sides and are cooked to medium. A pound of chicken livers will take about 8 to 10 minutes, but it all depends on the strength of the flame of your range. Transfer livers to the plate with onions and serve immediately with a little balsamic vinegar and flaky sea salt. Our next dish was pretty lavish for a Depression-era treat.
Hi foodies, I made a really nice chicken and cabbage stir fry.
31 cabbage stir fry. Cabbage stir-fry was more than just a meal during the Great Depression. It was an exercise in stretching resources to create something filling and nourishing. Cabbage, being one of the most affordable vegetables, was the hero ingredient in many households. It was often shredded thinly to cook faster and make it appear more plentiful. Cooking fat was precious, so many relied on rendered lard, bacon grease, or even just a splash of water to sauté the cabbage along with onions, which were also inexpensive and widely available. Creative cooks might add a pinch of sugar for caramelization or vinegar to enhance the flavor, transforming humble ingredients into a bright and tangy dish. Protein, when accessible, came in the form of diced bacon, ham scraps, or even a fried egg placed on top. This stir-fry was served as a side with the cornbread or rice, or as a standalone dish for a light dinner. The adaptability of cabbage allowed families to reinvent this dish daily, mixing in whatever odds and ends were available, such as carrots, potatoes, or green peppers. Cabbage stir-fry was economical, quick to prepare, and surprisingly nutritious, providing essential vitamins like vitamin C during a time when fresh produce was not always accessible.
Today I will be making veggie hash brown.
32 vegetable hash. Vegetable hash was a quintessential dish for families trying to maximize nutrition and minimize waste during the Great Depression. This dish started with a base of diced potatoes, which provided bulk. Potatoes were a Depression-era staple, often bought in bulk for their affordability and shelf stability. They were peeled, if peeling was necessary at all, nothing went to waste, and fried in lard, butter, or bacon drippings to form the base of the hash. The magic of vegetable hash lay in its flexibility. Any leftover vegetables, be it turnips, carrots, cabbage, or even greens, were diced and added to the skillet. Onions were commonly included, as they were inexpensive and added a savory depth. Families lucky enough to have access to meat might toss in scraps of bacon or sausage for additional flavor. The hash was seasoned with salt and pepper, though variations existed. Some cooks added a dash of paprika for warmth, while others included fresh or dried herbs like parsley or thyme. The vegetables were sautéed together until caramelized and golden, creating a medley of flavors and textures. The dish was usually served with bread, biscuits, or eggs, turning it into a satisfying and filling meal. Our next dish might not have been as filling, but it was incredibly satisfying.
I'm going to be making lentil soup.
33 lentil soup. Lentils, known for their long shelf life and high protein content, were often purchased in bulk. Families would soak the lentils to soften them and extend their volume before cooking them in large pots of water. The soup's base was simple. Onions, carrots, and celery were sautéed, if fat was available, to build a flavor foundation. The lentils were then simmered with these vegetables, creating a rich and hearty broth. If meat was accessible, families would add a ham hock, bacon scraps, or even a bone for flavor, though these additions were often seen as luxuries. Seasonings were minimalist. Salt and pepper were staples, while bay leaves, garlic, or thyme might make an appearance in more fortunate households. As the soup simmered, it thickened slightly, turning into a nourishing, almost stew-like consistency. The dish was often served with day-old bread or homemade biscuits, which could be dipped into the soup to soak up the savory broth. Lentil soup was not only practical but also adaptable. Families could stretch a pot of soup over several meals, reheating it and adding water to dilute it further if needed. For many, it was one of the few ways to ensure they were consuming enough protein and fiber, essential for energy and health during a challenging time. The aroma of lentil soup simmering on the stove provided a small comfort in uncertain days, and its popularity endures to this day as a testament to Depression-era resilience. 34 fried hominy. Fried hominy was a simple yet satisfying dish that became a staple during the Great Depression. Hominy, made from dried corn kernels treated with lye or lime to remove the hull and germ, was inexpensive and available in canned or dried form. It provided a hearty base for a meal, thanks to its mild flavor and ability to absorb seasoning. To prepare, hominy was drained and dried if canned, or soaked overnight and boiled if using the dried version. Once ready, the kernels were fried in a skillet with lard, bacon grease, or butter, whatever cooking fat was on hand. The heat transformed the hominy, giving it a crispy exterior while maintaining its tender interior. Families often seasoned it simply with salt and pepper, though those with access to paprika, garlic powder, or onions added these for extra flavor. Fried hominy was as versatile and could be served as a side dish or the centerpiece of a meal. It was often accompanied by eggs for breakfast or paired with a simple gravy for dinner. Leftover scraps of meat or vegetables could also be mixed in, creating a more substantial dish. Fried hominy turned a modest ingredient into something warm, nourishing, and comforting. Its satisfying texture and adaptability have ensured its place in the repertoire of classic comfort foods, much like our next treat. 35 Scrapple. Scrapple, a dish with roots in Pennsylvania Dutch cuisine, became a widespread Depression-era favorite because it was a frugal way to use every part of an animal. Made from pork scraps that were left over after butchering, Scrapple combined these remnants with cornmeal and seasonings to create a loaf-like dish. The mixture was simmered until thickened, poured into a mold, and allowed to set. Once firm, slices of the Scrapple loaf were fried until golden brown and crispy on the outside. The flavor of Scrapple depended on the spices and herbs used, which often included sage, thyme, and black pepper. While it was typically served as a breakfast item alongside eggs and toast, Scrapple was also enjoyed as a standalone dish for lunch or dinner. Its crispy exterior and creamy interior offered a satisfying contrast, and its savory flavor made it a versatile addition to any meal. Scrapple epitomized the Depression-era mantra of waste not, want not. By utilizing every part of the animal and combining it with inexpensive cornmeal, families could create a dish that was both economical and filling. Its enduring popularity in certain regions of the United States speaks to its unique combination of flavor, texture, and frugality. Talking about affordable dishes, let's look at this next dish.
Delicious homemade, grandmom style salmon patties. Make you some.
36 canned salmon patties. Canned salmon patties were a protein-rich dish that became a Depression-era mainstay due to their affordability and simplicity. Salmon, often sold in cans, was an economical alternative to fresh fish and an easy way to incorporate protein into a meal. To prepare, the salmon was mixed with breadcrumbs, an egg, if available, and seasonings like salt, pepper, and parsley. Some recipes called for a splash of lemon juice to brighten the flavor. The mixture was shaped into patties, which were then pan-fried in a small amount of oil or lard until golden brown and crispy on the outside. These patties were typically served with a side of vegetables or bread to round out the meal. For families with access to condiments, tartar sauce or ketchup was a common accompaniment. Canned salmon patties were prized for their versatility. They could be made quickly and used ingredients that were easy to store, making them an ideal choice for families with limited resources. They were also a great way to stretch a can of salmon to feed multiple people, demonstrating the creativity and ingenuity of cooks during this challenging era.
Slumgullion, beefaroni, it is essentially a one-pot meal.
37 Slumgullion. Slumgullion, a stew-like dish with a whimsical name, was a quintessential Depression-era meal. It was a catch-all dish that allowed families to use up whatever ingredients they had on hand. The base often consisted of potatoes or pasta, combined with ground meat or leftover scraps if available. Vegetables like onions, carrots, and celery were commonly added, creating a hearty one-pot meal. The dish's seasoning was minimal, typically limited to salt and pepper, though families with access to herbs or spices might include garlic, thyme, or paprika. Everything was simmered together in a pot, creating a thick, flavorful stew that was both filling and economical. The name Slumgullion itself became synonymous with resourcefulness, as it emphasized the dish's adaptable and utilitarian nature. Slumgullion was more than just sustenance. It was our lifesaver. By combining scraps and leftovers into a nourishing meal, families could stretch their food supplies further and ensure no ingredient went to waste. Its enduring legacy as a comfort food highlights its role in helping people through some of the toughest times in modern history. Our next dish stayed popular long after the hard times of the Depression era.
If you're looking for an absolutely delicious breakfast, look no further than these Johnny cakes.
38 Johnny cakes. Johnny cakes, a staple in Depression-era kitchens, originated from Native American cuisine and became a beloved budget-friendly food. These flat, unleavened cakes were made from cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, with milk or a bit of sugar added if resources allowed. The batter was mixed until smooth and cooked on a griddle or skillet, much like pancakes, until the exterior was golden and slightly crisp. The versatility of Johnny cakes made them an essential dish during hard times. They could be eaten plain, topped with a dab of butter, or sweetened with a drizzle of syrup or honey if available. Some families paired them with savory accompaniments like beans or stews, using them as a utensil to scoop up hearty portions. For households with no access to wheat flour, Johnny cakes offered a practical alternative, as cornmeal was often cheaper and more accessible. Johnny cakes were deeply tied to regional variations and family traditions. In the southern United States, they were thinner and crispier, while in the north, they were thicker and heartier. Despite their simplicity, they provided comfort and sustenance, embodying the ingenuity of families who could make the most of minimal ingredients. Today, much like our next treat, they're celebrated as a link to the resourcefulness and cultural history of a bygone era. 39 Vinegar dumplings. Vinegar dumplings exemplified Depression-era ingenuity, transforming humble pantry staples into a dessert that satisfied sweet cravings without breaking the bank. Made from flour, sugar, water, and a splash of vinegar, these dumplings were boiled in a sweet syrup made from sugar, water, and butter, or lard, for those who couldn't afford butter. The process of making vinegar dumplings was straightforward. The dough was mixed, shaped into small balls and simmered in the syrup until tender. The vinegar, though unconventional, served as a flavor enhancer, balancing the sweetness with a slight tang that made the dish surprisingly complex. For families with access to spices like cinnamon or nutmeg, these were added to the syrup to deepen the flavor. This dessert was cherished for its simplicity and the sense of indulgence it brought to austere times. It required no expensive ingredients and could be whipped up quickly, making it a favorite for families seeking to lift spirits. Vinegar dumplings stood as a testament to the creativity of home cooks during the Great Depression. Our next dish was a pretty interesting creation of those times: 40 mock chicken legs. Mock chicken legs, despite their name, contain no chicken at all. This Depression-era dish got its name from its resemblance to drumsticks, created by shaping inexpensive cuts of meat, often pork and veal, onto skewers. The skewered meat was coated in breadcrumbs and fried or baked, creating a dish that mimicked the appearance and texture of real chicken legs. The preparation began by grinding or finely chopping the meat, forming it into cylindrical shapes around wooden skewers, and rolling it in breadcrumbs. Eggs and milk were sometimes used to help the breadcrumbs adhere. The legs were then cooked until the coating was golden and the meat was tender. Families served mock chicken legs with mashed potatoes, gravy, or vegetables for a filling meal. This dish was a clever response to the high cost of chicken during the Depression. It allowed families to enjoy a luxury meal on a tight budget, making use of cheaper cuts of meat and stretching portions to feed more mouths.
If you're looking to take the humble onion and turn him into something special, do something like this.
41 peanut butter stuffed onions. Coming in first as number 1 is the peanut butter stuffed onions, which will stretch your imagination. It was a creative and nutritious meal made up with the combination of peanut butter and onions. It is cooked with a lump of peanut butter stuffed into a hole cut through the onion center, and sometimes joined with some breadcrumbs. It is a cheap and healthy meal to make. After all, the onions contained healthy vitamins, fiber, and mineral, while peanut butter provides valuable protein and helps in keeping bellies full. To prepare this, peel the onions. Then, in a small bowl, combine peanut butter and breadcrumbs. Mix continually till a paste is formed. Tightly pack each onion with the peanut butter mixture, and finally, place in a baking dish. Bake for 45 minutes to an hour until the onions are soft. Then enjoy. Our next dish was pure creamy goodness.
Oh my God. What the fuck? That's incredible. It's called fondue.
42 cream beef fondue. Another meal that kept bellies full during the Great Depression is the cream beef fondue. It had existed before the Great Depression, but became more prominent and known during this time. The cream beef fondue is made with chipped dried beef, which is cooked in milk gravy, and then served with toast or potato. In a large cooking pan, heat milk and cheese over medium heat. Stir until smooth. Add in your beef, onions, and mustard. Heat through. Then serve with breadcrumbs. Fondue is derived from the French word fondre, which means to melt. It was originated in Switzerland in the 18th century as a way for farm people to make the most of their few winter supplies. The family may get together around the fireplace with some leftover cheese, some old bread, and a little wine. Bread was rarely prepared in alpine farm settlements, so what was available was typically stale. The bread was softened and made delicious by dipping it in the melted cheese. As time passed, fondue evolved from these modest origins into a wintertime Swiss custom, and now became better as its recipe improved, giving us the creamy beef fondue. Our next treat might not have been as creamy, but it was just as great. 43 coffee soup. Have you ever considered the combination of coffee and toast? In the 17th century, coffee came to be, and for centuries it has been a luxury product. For a long while, coffee was expensive. It was largely consumed by businessmen, nobles, and the people in the society generally. In the 18th century, it became a problem in the land as citizens began to consume more coffee instead of water. In those times, the coffee soup was a perfect replacement and improvement on the already existing coffee. The coffee soup, also known as the coffee pulp or mash, was a simple combination that played a great role during the Great Depression by ensuring families had food to turn to. It is a simple recipe and very easy to make. All you have to do, pour your coffee into a bowl, add a little bit of cream, and then break your toast into little pieces and add to the coffee and cream in the bowl and stir. Coffee soup is ready to be eaten. During the Great Depression, the coffee soup was drunk by all in the morning. At that time, coffee roasts had more caffeine. Due to this, Frederick the Great tried to solve the problem by imposing a coffee ban on the so-called coffee sniffers, who roamed around the streets seeking the pleasant aroma from brewed or roasted beans. Our next treat is another serving of soupy goodness.
egg drop soup, just like you'd find at a Chinese restaurant at home.
44. Egg drop soup. Another exciting and mouth-watering meal that was eaten during the Great Depression is the egg drop soup. As simple as the dish sounds, the dish was given a suitable name that depicts the food-making method and process. To make this dish, whisked or beaten eggs are poured into a pot of boiling soup. Due to the outturn of the meal after the making process, the Chinese people referred to it as the egg flour soup. The egg drop soup was a Chinese meal, but still made a whole lot of impact during the Great Depression. To prepare this, bring the chicken stock to a simmer in a medium-sized soup pot. Stir in the sesame oil, salt, sugar, and white pepper. Add in the turmeric or yellow food coloring, if using. Using turmeric or yellow food coloring gives the soup that rich restaurant-style yellow color, but this is optional. Taste the soup and adjust the seasoning if needed.
Today we are making meals from the Depression.
45. Pasta peas. Pasta e piselli, translated to mean pasta and peas, is a tasty meal inspired by the Neapolitan. It is a combination of short pasta and fresh peas and was consumed BT the people during the Great Depression. This dish is an inexpensive and nourishing food that was accessible to the public during the Great Depression. This dish was not only tasty and affordable, but it was also very easy and quick to prepare. To prepare this dish, dice a potato into a pot and then dice an onion into the same pot. Fry the diced potato and onion in some oil for a while, add water, and let simmer. Proceed to add a can of peas, add pasta, tomato sauce, and allow it cook for a while before serving it as dinner. The facts that stands out about these dish includes the fact that it could be prepared in just one pot. It had a combination of fresh ingredients like virgin olive oil, onion, and parmesan, and lastly, the dish embodies good flavors. Talking about flavorful goodness, let's look at our next dish. 46. Potato pancakes. The potato pancake is also a meal that was largely consumed during the Great Depression. The potato pancake is a meal made from grated or mashed potatoes, bound together with simple ingredients like flour, matzo meal, or eggs. Often seasoned with onion or garlic, they were a flavorful way to make the most of inexpensive staples. To prepare this dish, grate potatoes, add remaining ingredients and mix. Place in plies in frying pan in and press thin. Fry until crisp and golden brown, turning once. Sprinkle with table sugar cane and serve hot. Potato pancakes could be served plain or dressed up with toppings. It was commonly consumed with sour creams and sweet toppings like applesauce. For families struggling to make ends meet, this dish was a practical and versatile way to stretch their food budget. During the Great Depression, many variations emerged based on what was available. Some recipes incorporated mashed potatoes for a softer texture, while others used sweet potatoes for a different twist. With their affordability and adaptability, potato pancakes became a beloved comfort food during one of the hardest times in modern history, much like our next treat.
Absolutely delicious flavor. This has got to be some of the best stew that I've ever had.
47. Mulligan stew. The Mulligan stew is another exciting dish that was popularly consumed by the people during the Great Depression in camps of migratory workers. It was a family-friendly, easy stew prepared with tender beef stew meat, potatoes, corn, carrots, peas, green beans, and a perfect blend of Italian spices. To prepare the meal, add flour, onion powder, garlic powder, and freshly ground black pepper to a large zipper seal bag and shake to combine. Add the beef stew meat and shake to coat. Heat some vegetable oil in a Dutch oven over medium heat. Remove the beef and add it to the pan. Reserve any flour mixture left in the bag. Add extra tablespoon vegetable oil to the Dutch oven over medium heat. Add chopped onion and celery and cook for about 4 minutes. Sprinkle in the remaining flour and cook it for 2 more minutes while stirring it constantly. Add oregano, basil, and marjoram. Cook it for 30 seconds and stir it continuously. Stir in beef broth. Cook for 2 minutes, stirring several times. Add the browned beef back to the pan. Cover and place in the oven for an hour. Add potatoes, corn, carrots, peas, and green beans to the pot. Place back in the oven and cook for half an hour or until stew and vegetables are tender. Our next dish was a lifesaver in the hard times of the Depression.
Garbage plate, well, it's everything that you probably shouldn't eat, but you really want to.
48. Garbage mashup. This meal was also popularly consumed by the Americans during the Great Depression. The garbage mashup was a quick meal that was easily accessible and available for the people during that period. All you need to prepare the dish is a little amount of round beef, baked beans, macaroni salad, and home fries. Other side ingredients necessary to make the mashup includes onions, chili, mustard, ketchup, or hot sauce to add to its flavor. 49. Poorman's meal. This dish stood as a significant meal to the people during the Great Depression, as it remained cheap and hearty, just like every other meal during that period, due to the fact that people were out of work and had to survive. The poor man's meal was made up of inexpensive ingredients that were easy to purchase and also lasted all winter in storage. It was made with ingredients such as potatoes, onions, and canned baked beans. The main ingredients were potatoes and hot dogs. Hot dogs were cheaper than meat. Put the potatoes in a pan and slice onions into it. Then pour oil over the potatoes and onions and fry on medium heat. Once the potatoes are slightly brown, add few spoons of tomato sauce. You can add your hot dogs or serve with baked beans, and after that, dinner is served. On to the last dish of the video.
A creamy rice pudding, what I think of as the ultimate in comfort food.
50 rice pudding. The rice pudding became a popular meal during the Great Depression, mainly because it was a cheap, affordable, and simple to make. The recipe includes basic ingredients such as rice, milk, sugar, eggs, and cinnamon. These ingredients were often available even during economic hardship. The meal provided a soothing and nutritious dish for families who were struggling. Rice pudding was one of the proofs of how people made the most of limited resources to survive. To prepare this meal, cook your white rice till it is tender. Proceed to add some milk, sugar, and salt to the tender rice over medium heat until it is thick. Then, stir in the remaining milk, egg, and raisins. Cook for 2 more minutes. Remove the food from the heat and stir in the butter and vanilla. Serve the meal and top it with a sprinkle of ground cinnamon, nuts, or a drizzle of honey. There are 3 basic methods in preparing this meal. They include boiling method, oven baked, and steam bath. The beauty in this homemade meal is the preservation method. You can freeze the pudding in freeze-safe bags and it will last for about 3 months. And that's our look into 20 of the dinners that got us through the Great Depression, folks. It was so amazing doing this with you today. What was your favorite part of the video? What dish do we feel we left out? Feel free to tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.